Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Office of Public Instruction on our dive into transitioning with regards to ESSER, but also other grants or other situations that may be applicable to this transitioning mode. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our team this morning. We have Rebecca Brown, who I'm sure many of you have already spoken with. She's our ESSER manager. And then we also have Jessica Bull, who is our administrative specialist, and she's going to be manning the Zoom today as we go through. And I'll let her do a little bit of housekeeping to begin with.
Thank you, Wendy. So just a couple of things to note for housekeeping. This session is being recorded. You are muted. And any questions you do have, please put them in the Q&A box. If you have a verbal question, please just use the raise hand button and I can unmute you. These slides and the audio will be uploaded to our website, so you can review this later if you'd like. And we do have guidance sessions every month, so just be on the lookout for more guidance sessions next month. And then if everyone could please put their name and their school district in the Q&A box. We just kind of want to make sure that Q&A box is working correctly. If that does not work, please put your name and school district in the chat box.
Thank you, Jessica. So my name again is Wendy Fons, and I'm the ESSER Director for the Office of Public Instruction in the state of Montana. And we're going to dive today into transition planning as we come into the spring and also into the summer. Many clerks and superintendents transition in positions, and the impact of that on grant management is pretty significant. So we've got a couple of tips that will help specific with ESSER, but also with other grants as well. Next slide, please. This is our contact information, and on the next slide, we'll see a more detailed of our whole team. There we go. So this is the whole team, and it has lots of different contact information. Again, this will all be up on our website. As we move forward, one note I will make here is that we are going to be heading into data collection soon for the ESSER grant, and so this list is all inclusive of that effort as well. Thank you. Next slide. So the goals for today's session are to look at transition planning and what things you may want to consider. Things like accounts and contact information, need to know ESSER information that either you have gathered over the last couple of years in working in this grant or others have shared with you, and an ESSER grant tracking form that one of our business clerks in Corvallis has created. And so being able to share out what she uses may be helpful to you as a district. We will end with wrap up and some additional resources. You are welcome at any point to ask questions. Next slide, please. So to start with transition planning, I always think of this in terms of the different jobs that I've held, and I've moved into those positions with past knowledge of the position I'm going into. But sometimes that expectation of what's available, what resources are available to me to use, may not actually be there. So it's important in a transition planning to think historically and contextually, what knowledge will that new employee need? Or if I am the new employee, what knowledge will I need? Both in a content organization, content knowledge, the organization culture, the staff, as well as tips that the person before me may have gained. So having this sort of list of what things to gather can be very helpful. The information that's needed to communicate needs to be clear, both in the training and in the content. So we've got documentation as the new employee comes in, or as I'm transitioning out. If I were to take my position and transition it to others, that documentation would be very important, in addition to my verbal communication of these are the things that need to be done. Next slide, please. So when we think about how to communicate that information, I really like this diagram over here, which is as one person is in a position and doing the work, and ESSER is a perfect example, we have many business clerks and superintendents who are incredibly proficient at using e-grants and navigating the various nuances of ESSER, both the allowable use of funds, but also what is reasonable in terms of timeframes to get forms done, to create an amendment, a cash request, those types of things. And they're very expert in their field. But when they leave, what ends up sometimes happening is that piece gets pulled out. And so if you look at that diagram in the upper right-hand corner, it's kind of a shock effect, because the new person coming on board may in fact be very competent, but simply lack the little pieces necessary to connect their knowledge of e-grants with the knowledge of ESSER. So if you look at a document flow diagram, it actually indicates what documents are needed to process this grant or manage this grant, and who touches them. So where do those documents go? Where does that information come from? Where does it go? If, for example, the board requires a monthly update on ESSER spending, then your information may come from the e-grants list and going into the portal and pulling a screenshot and putting it into a file. Or you may simply go to the OPI website and pull a screenshot of your district's current allocations and expenditures. So looking at that flow of information, where does the information come from? What format is it going out in? And who is it going to is really important. Also looking at needs for additional data. So as we look at this coming timeframe of the spring and data collection, looking at the fact that there's going to be a greater ask, therefore what kinds of data may need to be captured and in what format. When you receive invoices, but you didn't know that it needed an access ID, for example. So having one of those physical requisitions or invoices and saying, oh, I need to have an ID, I need to have an LE number in order to get into eGrants to enter this information in. Therefore, I need to be in the contact list of eGrants to enter in the invoice or the cash request. You received an email indicating that you had to complete an ESSER report, but you don't know what software portal to use, and you can't find anything on ESSER to report on that document, on that plan. So again, these types of questions that would come about as a new superintendent or a new business clerk comes on board can be very stressful and very frustrating to simply get an email that says you're out of compliance or you need to do ABC, but you don't know what that ABC is. So as you go forward as a new clerk and superintendent, you may want to collect that documentation and use it as a batoning. Think of a track relay race, a batoning of those things that you found useful for the next person. Another example here is somebody made the last file, but you aren't sure where it is. Is it in a binder? Is it on a shelf? How about a laptop, a server? And what is the file called? So these are all questions that have come to us and the ESSER team from local districts legitimately asking these questions about ESSER files. And the Office of Public Instruction doesn't maintain all of this data in a format that you at the local level may need to use. So while eGrants has a lot of data in it, it's not necessarily in the mode that you want it, because you may want to report. Maintaining that data flow diagram or that flow and documentation of where the data comes from, what format it needs to be in, and where it's going can be very helpful and reduce a tremendous amount of stress for the next person who may come on board. Next slide, please. So this is something that I've kind of gone through and created coming on board into the Office of Public Instruction, looking at examples of documents that I have to create on a monthly, a quarterly, and annually basis. There are more, but this is just a snapshot. And so it's kind of looking at, I've got hyperlinks, I've got where are things needed, what are they also called, synonyms. One person may call them one thing, another person may call them another thing. And just kind of having that documented will help the next person coming on board to pick up where I left off. Next slide, please. So key contacts and connections are really important when you transition. And sometimes those contacts are listed on a website. So the OPI contact employee list will give you some titles of people you can contact about things. However, sometimes the person has changed, and so that may not be updated. So you want to look at name, title, email, and phone organization and department, and the source of information. Why is that person important in the position as you come in? So maybe somebody gives you information and says, the ESSER team, Wendy and Rebecca are really good contacts, and you have those kind of listed out, but noting the fact that that's for ESSER, because unfortunately, Rebecca and I cannot answer all things that have to do with 21st century or have to do with the food program or title funding. So we're kind of specific in the ESSER granting area. Meetings, maybe documenting out what meetings are regular and periodic. These are monthly meetings. These are webinar meetings. When I came on board, I knew of 4 different organizations that did monthly meetings, and I needed to attend those. So being able to know these are coming up next month as a new employee, I need to go attend those at a national level. What kinds of software and portal access would you potentially need? So we actually have a contact quick guide, one for clerks, one for superintendents, and you can just kind of walk through and say, okay, so for e-grants, I need to update what is called the authorized representative. For something else, I may need to update that portal. For Qualtrics, which has to do with the plans and ESSER, I need to update an email address. And each one of those processes, because we have not moved into the modern world of data yet, have different processes. So we really have to notify each of those entities separately until they become linked together. Unfortunately, at the moment, they're just not linked together. Next slide, please. So the quick reference guide to new clerks, this is kind of a screenshot of where you can find it on the OPI website. We've got a link that's in there as well. There's a contact portal, and there's also central updates is also another place that you can email information. And I do recognize how frustrating it is sometimes to be updating your e-grants, your portal for grant applications, to be updating things there. And then all of a sudden be sent something that says your ESSER grant is out of compliance because the plans haven't been updated and you can't find the plans in e-grants. And that is because the plans are in Qualtrics and you need a separate access for that. So we do recognize that that can be challenging. We can't eliminate the challenge, but we can lessen the frustration over it simply by letting you know that that's the case. So when you make a list, as you transition either out of a position or you're coming into a position, having that list of what do I need, who do I need to contact and update, that can be very helpful. Next slide. So when we look at grant compliance, and I'm going to talk just in general about any type of grant, whether it's ESSER or otherwise, really keeping, again, sort of a list of things that are required for that grant. A one-page scope document can be very helpful for a grant. It indicates what are the compliances for the grant. And in ESSER, they're really just 4. You have to do a final expenditure report at the end of all the funds being used. You have to maintain a safe return plan and a ARP plan, which is a use of funds plan. Both of those plans have to be updated at least every 6 months, and they have to be posted on your website. And then you also have to do this wonderful data collection, which is coming up. So it's kind of those 4 places where you have to meet some compliances that are at a very high level. You may also internally have some past reports or guidance at the local level that need to be maintained. Maybe your board requires a monthly update. Maybe the school staff, when they do staff meetings, has an update on all things ESSER related to salaries and benefits. Okay, so you could have some additional pieces that are required there. Maybe you have a calendar of key events and activities. One of the things we've been asked for a lot is, when is the data collection going to occur? And sometimes it's a to be announced. We know it's in spring, but we don't have the actual date. So sometimes those dates are not as concrete as we would like, but it at least gives a new employee the ability to do a little bit of planning around it. What kinds of reports are needed? Again, could be part of a compliance, but it also might be something that you just see as necessary as the person who's leaving the position. Maybe you created a tracking form like the business clerk in Corvallis did, and you think it's very useful. So that would be something that you would transition to the next person coming in. And you may even have a list of proposed grants and changes that you would like, but never got a chance to implement. I always, in all the jobs I've ever left, I have a list of the things when I had enough time I would love to do. And I transition that to the next person coming in because they, in fact, may be able to pick those things up. A list of partnerships and agencies really helps. So again, it's what kinds of programming and funding and staff might those programs, partnership agencies have that you can benefit from. Examples would be in funding and staff, AmeriCorps Vista, Teachers Residency Program, Extension Office, University Internships. That list, while it may become outdated, it does assist the next person coming in and keeping those partnerships active and going. Next slide, please. So when we look at the ESSER grant as an overview, we have, and this is part of that packet for transitioning, a new person coming in to the ESSER side at your local level, really just identifying that you've got 3 grants, there's not just one, and when they expire. Just that alone can be incredibly helpful. And then the purpose, the preparing, preventing, and responding, having that conversation about why is that important? How does that language get used? In what forms is it necessary? Training guides, having just a list from the OPI website. Here are all the training guides that are available. State plans and local plans. So district level plans, but also at the state level, how do those cross over? And again, I keep mentioning, because we're in the spring right now, the data collection. So at a high level, as an employee transitions in, you can kind of look at a time period that they would need to train if they had not had this experience before in ESSER management. If they had ESSER experience, if it's a clerk or a superintendent coming from another district, you may still have particular guidances that you would like them to refresh on or gain knowledge again in. So it can still be, these transition plans can still be impactful and helpful to people that are transitioning within the same title. Next slide, please. So a couple of tips to pass along, which sometimes become these very little things, but can save a tremendous amount of time. So trainings you intended that were invaluable to you. So which ones did you go to that you really felt, annually were very important? Drop downs on a fiscal year in e-grant. So being able to know, oh, you've got to do a drop down if you want to find ESSER. You're not going to find it on the 23 or 24 year. The 3-bar exception. So we've got an arrow pointing to a lot of the screens in e-grants have these like 2 little bars on the right-hand side. And if you slide that open, if you drag it down, it will actually open up that cell and give you a much bigger view of the text that's entered in. What kinds of emails are going to come from no reply? So the fact that an ESSER ARP plan submission that you've updated, the fact that the authorized representative will get an email that comes from a no reply. So knowing what that is, so you're able to track that. Again, as a new person coming in can be very impactful. And then large items or projects that may need school board or OPI approval. So kind of looking at, that could be an extra compliance. Maybe also the school district says, if you're doing anything with ESSER funds that involves bonuses or stipends to teachers, that you need to have board approval or need to talk to the curriculum committee. Each local entity may have a different guideline for that. So noting those tips that may have changed outside of the general guidance that somebody in another district transitioning in might not know about are helpful. Next slide. So we did want to share with you one Excel file that was very helpful. Jolene at the Corvallis School District is the business manager there, and she creates, as one of the tips that she shared on one of our webinars, is an Excel sheet for tracking ESSER funding. And so she tracks her amendments, she tracks her cash requests, she's got these different tabs, and you can create your own. This is just one that she shared. So that kind of a document, a new employee coming in to manage ESSER would be very helpful for them to know that this exists. And we don't always have, at the time of a transition, enough time to document all these things. So if they're already in a transitioning binder or transitioning folder, it allows the new employee to have greater access to resources that they need to be successful in their new position. We do have in this slide deck, but it's available on our website, the training that walks through a little bit of this Excel sheet, so you can use that as well. Next slide, please. So when we look at the overview of e-grants, as a new person transitioning in, it's very important to get access to e-grants because it is the portal by which everything is entered into for the grant. So there are a couple of ways you can go in. You can go in as a public entity. So until you gain access, you can actually go in and just look at what's happening for the district. And it's over on the right-hand side underneath login. There's a little blue and one says new user, which would be how you would ask for a new user access. But also there's public access. And each of you are kind of attached to your district. So even if you've been with another district, you want to come in and have access to your current district. We've got some webinars that can walk you through some of this, that navigating e-grants, amendments. So how do I make changes? ESSER is extremely unusual in a grant that it allows you to make continual changes throughout the life cycle of the grant. How do you do that? Cash requests, how do you request funding after the fact? And preparing and processing e-grants and the error messages. I think we're always adding to the error messages, unfortunately, but a lot of those are just slide decks. So you can watch the webinar, but you can also go and pull up the slide deck, either print it or just have it for later reference. So you can quickly go through and pull those up. Again, that kind of a list, if the person coming on board as a business manager or superintendent will be dealing a lot with ESSER, having those documented in one place for that transition is really helpful. Next slide. So in terms of security changes, I'm not going to go through in detail on this, but you do have the ability to change that security content. So authorized representatives do need to be updated. It's really important not to share the emails back and forth, but to actually update. One place where this becomes really critical as well is in the plan updating. So when you're updating an ESSER plan, if you're coming from another district and you enter in your email address, it will then trigger the old district's portal access to the particular file. So not only will you get into Qualtrics to update a plan, but you will actually get the plan from the previous district. So sharing that portal access is really not a good thing to do because it's anchored on your district's, the current district's view of a plan. So it's not just a portal access, it's a specific plan access. Next slide, please. So this was that drop down that I was mentioning, that in order to get to different files, so the ESSER 1 grant is pulled through the fund grant and related services, and that you have to drop down to 2020 in the program year. And then for ESSER 2 and 3, you do 2021. So even though right now you can use those funds for 22 and 23, you still have to go see what's happening or submit an amendment or make changes, all have to go through the drop down of 2021. So that's an important thing. Again, we do get individuals who will call and say, you know I have this grant, but I can't see it. And that's often the reason why, is because the drop down year is different. Next slide, please. Another place that we'd like to mention that has some resources that would be good to share with your new employees coming in, or if you're transitioning out, are the status updates. So we update this on a monthly basis. Trustees are sent an update once a month, so they get an actual high-level view that shows here is what the district has allocated and here's what's spent in these 3 grants. And then at a district level, you actually can see a little bit more detail. So both of those reports are available on a monthly basis and posted on our website. That would be a good document, whether it's one page or multiples, to share with the individual transitioning in as you transition out, or vice versa. Remaining balance is in there. I think that's another thing that Jolene mentioned when she was looking at her tracking document. She kind of uses these reports to sort of cross-check what she's got and if there are any significant differences, although the timing is important. She can go through and go, yeah, that sounds about right. It's sort of a checking point in that process. Next slide, please. So again, just to kind of end, these are some contacts for you in terms of the ESSER side of the grant process. Feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. We're providing this transition training because as new clerks and superintendents, business managers, grant managers come on board, having some of this knowledge up front can be very impactful and help meet a lot of the compliances that are often date driven. So we appreciate your assistance in this. We're here to help as much as we can, and feel free to reach out at any time. I'll go ahead and pause and see if there are any questions at this point.
I do not see any questions, Wendy.
Okay. This is just a high level view of our website. So you can see the ESSER button is on the right-hand side of the homepage, and then it takes you to sort of an all things ESSER page, and you can scroll down and there's lots of training, lots of other resources there for you. So again, my name is Wendy Fons. I'm the ESSER and EANS Director for the Office of Public Instruction. Thank you so much for attending today's session on transitioning. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and ask. Thank you.